Hi, welcome to another The Journal.ie live stream. We have a double header this afternoon. We have Barry Kenny of Irish Rail up first to answer your questions about the rail network. A little later on, we have Sean O'Neill of the National Roads Authority dropping by. In fact, he's sitting there just behind the camera. So there's still plenty of time to get in touch. If you want to drop us a question, news@thejournal.ie is the best place to email for the moment. You can also find us on Twitter. If you've found this website, you'll find us on Twitter pretty easily. TheJournal.ie is where we are. So send us your questions. Barry's here for about 20 minutes. Sean O'Neill then joining us for about 20 minutes as well. So thanks for coming in, Barry.
No worries, Art.
And so we've tons of questions. We've done a few of these live streams, and this has been one of the most popular ones in terms of streams of questions coming in. And I suppose people are interested. It's that time of year when people who don't generally use the motorway network or the rail network are thinking about breaks away. We just had Paddy's Day, we have the Easter break coming up soon, then a May bank holiday. We're kind of in bank holiday season, yeah. So there's plenty of questions that are recurring to people. So we'll start first of all with something that happened today, and it's something that happens unfortunately every couple of months. We see a story like this, and a truck hit the bridge. It all seems to be the bridge at Bath Avenue in Dublin 4. I don't know what it is about that bridge, but what can you tell us about what happened today?
Yeah, it was a truck, low loader, with some machinery on the back, and quite simply the driver just hit the bridge, managed to free himself and drove off without waiting, and that's something that we'll address elsewhere with CCTV, thankfully.
Yeah.
And what has to happen in those situations is, even though in the vast majority of situations, if a vehicle hits a bridge, the bridges are strong, it won't be an issue, but we do have to check it before we can get the trains over it again. So we get the bridge crew out as quickly as we can. I think the line was stopped for about 20 minutes this morning, but it's between Grand Canal Dock and Lansdowne Road. It's a busy morning peak and affects thousands of people.
Right, and what's the situation if, obviously not that specific one, but in cases where a truck hits a road, and it's happened a couple of times. I noticed, I think this was in late 2013, you were tweeting about the driver. We have your reg and the company you drive for, talk soon, lots to discuss, was the tweet from Irish Rail. It sounds like it's something that kind of gets your goat.
Well, it does, because, you know, it is basic. I mean, it is basic as, you know, a car driver knowing that you have to indicate when you're turning onto another road. The truck driver has to know their load heights, and they also have to know the heights of bridges on the route that they're taking. And even if they don't know that second bit, there is signage in front of all of these bridges saying this is the clearance. So therefore, if you know part one, you should know that part two is not going to end happily if you decide to go down that road.
Right, so statistically we probably have quite a few truck drivers watching, so if you want any personal threats you want to give out, let us know. But
we know where you live.
That's definitely noted. On to something else that people have been talking about in the last couple of days. We had that vandalism at the train station in Bayside. And again, that's my neck of the woods, and I know that's happened at that train station a couple of times. It happened at Kilbarraco Junction as well, going back the last couple of years. I suppose in Bayside in particular, it can be a quite isolated station at night. After rush hour, it's a bit of this in a housing estate, but it's a bit away. What happens there in terms of investigation and following that up? It just gets handed over to the Gardaí. And
well, you know, you work with the Gardaí. Obviously, again, CCTV covers that area. Obviously, the investigations, because it wasn't just the Dart station. I think the nearby shopping centre as well was vandalised. It is, as you say, kind of in that area. We've had a few issues, and we've been setting up a community forum with the Gardaí and with kind of local residents associations to try to address some of these. People who travel on the Luce line now, for example, will know Broome Bridge was very much a black spot for antisocial behaviour, for vandalism, and the community there were very proactive, and we've been working with them. We've actually seen the number of incidents go down by about half there. Still, you know, we do have too many problems there, but it just shows that by getting the various groups together, we can get some progress. But it's going to need, from our side, additional security resources in a time when we're, you know, financially tight, but it has to be done, and obviously then working with the Gardaí to ensure there's rapid response when things happen.
Is it something that's increased since you have fewer man stations in the evening since the machines came in, or is there anything to
not particularly. I mean, seasonally certainly we will have issues. You know, summer will be busier from that point of view. Again, we work with the Gardaí ahead of things like, you know, when you get the very good weather during the summer, the Portmarnock Beach weekends, that type of thing, in terms of ensuring that we work with them. People will remember we closed certain stations for access at Garda request when you've got very large groups going out to Holt or Portmarnock for a short time. So there's very close liaison there, but certainly if you like, there's a new initiative there in that kind of Kilbarrack, Holt Junction, Bayside area, because it is an area where we're having too many problems.
Yep. Okay. Moving on to another issue. This is these are just general questions people have been asking about. This new intercity train plan to link Dublin Airport with the likes of Cork, Galway and Belfast.
Yeah.
Something your CEO David Franks was talking about in a newspaper interview at the start of the year. I believe it still has to get an okay from the government and all that sort of thing. So what's the status with that at the moment?
Well, it's the National Transport Authority at the moment are assessing all of the various options to serve Dublin Airport and to serve Swords, if you like. It's the North Dublin Transport Study. So it's been considered actually in conjunction with a light rail option that would serve Swords heading in through, I think, coming out from Cabra, going underground Glasnevin and out that corridor to Swords. So we certainly feel that in terms of getting, a fast link to the city centre, in terms of giving the kind of capacity that you need when you're coming off airplanes with luggage, and in terms of the cost of building this and building it without impacting negatively on existing infrastructure. You're talking about in the region of 250 million euro, which is a lot of money, but relatively modest in infrastructure terms, and you're building it in green fields directly under the flight path. So you would then have airport to city centre, Darts, taking 20 minutes to get into the city centre and connecting to the national network. And longer term, when the Dart Underground is developed, you then have airport through Docklands, Pearse, St Stephen's Green, Christchurch, Houston, linking to the national network. So it would give benefit in the shorter term and give a lot of longer term strategic options as well for the development of the rail network.
And if all Irish Rail's recommendations are taken on board, what's the fastest we can imagine this happening?
4 years, if it was approved, funding was approved, and with the planning process, there's an accelerated planning process for infrastructure projects. But with all that going smoothly, we'll be talking about a 4-year period from approval to trains running.
Okay, great stuff. Another big issue people have been talking about. It might seem like a minor thing, but it's a big thing if you're caught short, and that's the closure of toilets at train stations. Something like 10 or 15 toilet facilities being closed over the last year or so, I think it is.
Yeah.
What's the rationale for that?
Well, we looked at it. I suppose there's a project that's covering not just toilets, it's power supply to stations where there's a lot of costs, and looking at things like replacing heating systems so they're more energy efficient. In terms of toilets, where we've got a male and female toilet in some stations, we've just amalgamated them, so it's a unisex toilet now. And in some areas, though, when stations are unmanned, we will close them because we're getting costs from things like vandalism and antisocial behaviour. All of our trains, with the exception of the Dart, do have toilet facilities on board, and generally people aren't waiting that long at stations for their next train. So it's a very small number of instances where there simply isn't a facility available outside commuter stations where we don't have them anyway because of the frequency of services. But
and these tend to be kind of outer commuter stations?
Some, like the Newbridge or whatever, and then in some other smaller stations where you have very, very lightly used stations, like for example Rosslare Strand, not the ferry terminal as was misreported elsewhere. The ferry terminal obviously is a very important point of access for tourists, but Rosslare Strand, very small station, very lightly used, and we do have issues with vandalism and antisocial behaviour, so we have closed the facilities there. Okay.
Now, faults on the rail system. This is something that got a good bit of attention. At the end of last year, there was a series of faults on the north side of Dublin, and there was delays. It all seemed to be rush hour for some reason throughout a couple of weeks. So that's one issue. And then another signal fault this morning. A reader just got in contact to say there was people left waiting for an hour on a crowded train at Clonsilla because of a fault at Glasnevin. So if you just talk us through, I mean, this would seem to be one thing that goes wrong in the system, and it can cause chaos and cause delays for thousands of vehicles.
But signalling is the eyes and ears of the railway system. It's what allows trains to run safely. It basically says the next section of this rail network is clear, therefore this train can proceed into it. So if your signalling system has a fault, it fails safe, everything goes to red. But basically the controller then doesn't have that oversight of exact positioning of the train. So you try to rectify it as quickly as you can. If you can't, then we do put in certain restricted working, which again will reduce the number of trains that will come through. So if your signalling isn't working, it is going to cause disruption. It was a bad one this morning at Glasnevin, affected about 3 points in total, which affected. So we didn't ordinarily, if we had a fault there, we'd be able to bring trains into either Docklands or Connolly. This morning we were able to bring them into neither, and it caused a lot of disruption. Obviously, we apologise to people for that, and indeed some of them then got caught by the truck in the bridge later on as they headed southside. In terms of that recurring fault late last year, that was, and I'm trying to remember the exact details of it now, but it was this recurring software fault that literally hit at the same time every time it happened. It was something like 17:37 in the evening, so right
exactly
at the heart of peak. That particular issue has been rectified. We are also at the moment doing work to upgrade the signalling on various parts of the network. We did it out around the Hope Junction area there last year. We're going to be working through this year and next on the city centre area as well. The main purpose of that is to allow more trains to run, because at the moment we can only run 12 trains each way per hour through that heart of that city centre, that Connolly to Grand Canal Dock area. This would allow us to build that up to 20 each way, so you can grow the number of trains on all of the routes. But as well as the benefit of it being more trains, it's a newer system, so there'll be less faults.
Okay, we've got a few questions from readers about that in a second. I'll get to the reader questions as quick as I can. So this is from Barry O'Shea. So his question is, who deems stations to be within the Dublin commuter zone? Kilcoole, for instance, is a further distance from Kilcock from Connolly station with a vast fare difference. How do we go about changing it so that there's a fair service for all passengers? He pays, he says, 1,750 a year for an annual rail ticket. So obviously there'll be huge differences between people travelling, from different stations, and it might be, €500 perhaps,
right,
in some circumstances.
The short answer is the National Transport Authority that decide on fares and fare structures. One thing they have been doing, and indeed before they took responsibility that we've been doing as well for a few years, is to try to narrow those gaps. So it is an issue in some areas. As it happens, Kilcock's not a good example, because the actual annual ticket from Kilcock is 1,640, and from Maynooth it's 1,420, which is the next station in. So per kilometre you're actually paying less from Kilcock in that particular instance, which shows actually how that has worked over years in terms of trying to bridge those gaps. The fact of the matter is, if you bring, however, a station into another structure, there's going to be lost revenue-wise to us, and we have funding issues, and that has to be made up from somewhere.
It must be very frustrating for people who live just over the line.
Sure, and I mean it is the case. Internationally, you've got urban fare structures and you have national fare structures, so it's not something that uniquely happens in Ireland. There are, if you like, kind of great, because when you have density of use, as you do in a commuter area, you're spreading those operating costs amongst more customers. So when you go out into a national network, it's obviously less per customer, and that's why you have these different structures internationally. But it's the NTA who decide on it, and they obviously, we put in our fares application annually. They will decide not only on what we apply, but they have indeed in some instances changed the fare structures primarily within the commuter zone, but it is also within their gift to change the boundaries as well.
Okay, question from the Journal.ie's Paul Hosford, who's sitting over there behind us. Why on St. Patrick's Day, the busiest tourist day of the year, does public transport run a Sunday service?
Well, basically the patterns of travel are completely different on a public holiday. If we were running a weekday service with lots of trains at 6, 7, 8 in the morning on the commuter network, there'd be nobody on them. But actually what we did was, it wasn't just a basic Sunday service. We operated 5 darts from the north side, 5 from the south side, additional to a Sunday service before the parade, a similar number afterwards, extra trains from Drogheda and Maynooth. So if you look at the dart, during the times that people were travelling into and home from the parade, we actually had more frequent service than we would on a normal weekday. So it wasn't just a case of a flat Sunday service, it was with the extra trains at the right times.
Okay. Question from Barry Finnegan, a reader. Is there any chance the Navan Rail Line project could be resurrected? Now, this was part of the Transport 21 plan, I think, back in 2005.
It was, and we got quite away with the planning there, but a lot of those projects were simply put on ice when the country's economic crisis hit. It's not something that's being actively talked about being revived at the moment. There's very limited funding in terms of capital investment. Our priority right now is in terms of maintaining and improving the existing network. That's why we're doing work on the Cork line, for example, to try to improve speeds there. The type of projects that are being talked about for the future are things like the Airport Dart, the Phoenix Park Tunnel, Dart Underground, Navan. At the moment, isn't on the agenda, I'm afraid.
Okay. Question from the tech teams, Stephen McBride, in fact, who you were talking to earlier on. Why are they still running 4-carriage darts at rush hour? They say they're continuously monitoring the situation, but this doesn't seem to be true. I've been on so many darts, and they've been dangerously overcrowded because of this policy, and nothing seems to be changing. 4-carriage darts at rush hour, is that happening?
Yeah, we have a mix of 4, 6 and 8. We do look at where the actual numbers are, the times people are travelling on. Dart travel and commuter travel and their equivalents everywhere around the world involve full loading, which involves heavy levels of standing at peak times. I hate to kind of reiterate or whatever, we do have a funding problem at the moment. But against that, since we made the original changes, since we reduced the capacities, we've increased 20 trains in total in size during the morning and evening peaks by looking at the loadings, how they've been developing. Thankfully, we're getting growth again, and we have the scope as that happens to increase either individual trains or generally increase capacity. One thing we are looking at doing, and we'll be looking at for early next year, is trying to increase the frequency of darts again, to move from, we have a core service of every 15 minutes with some additional service at peak, but to try to increase those. And we're looking at training up drivers internally as well, so as we have the resources to do that. So the Dart is on a growth path again, thankfully, and we will respond to that and make sure that at all times the capacity is there, but it will always involve standing.
And do you need to train up drivers from elsewhere in the network, or how will that work?
No, it's anybody internally can apply. We do recruit internally in the first instance. So there's quite a lot.
People who are already drivers or working elsewhere in the company.
You can, or if you're working in other parts of the company, if you're working at stations or whatever. There's quite a lot of aptitude tests, whatever. It's a solitary job. It's an interesting job. It's not for everybody, and quite a lot of people fall at that hurdle as it happens. But that training is happening.
Okay, great stuff. From reader Neil Loughlin, can you ask why on the busiest trains the names above the seat for pre-booked tickets conveniently don't work? I've noticed it happening at least 5 times, and those times have been on the busiest trains, i.e. Friday evening, Dublin to Cork, Dublin to Galway. I was talking to the girl sitting next to me last Friday, and she even said it's too much of a coincidence that this always seems to happen on the booked out trains. So she's saying essentially that she turns up, she might have her pre-booked ticket, you expect your name to appear above the seat, but the displays aren't working.
Well, it's certainly chaos. Not conveniently, it's inconveniently for us and for more importantly for customers.
Is it on the busiest trains though?
It's not that it would happen there. It does happen too much. It does happen too much that they're not operational when people board. We are actually changing the technological systems behind that so that it'll be more reliable, and I hope that your reader will see that. We'll see a real improvement in that in the next few weeks, because it is one of the issues that we get, that customers tell us about the most, and when we have it working to correct. It's as I say, the technological backup, and you're asking the wrong person in terms of the IT side of that. But we are changing the way that it's done, so as people, when they board the train, when the doors open, that information will be up on the screen. Okay,
now a good few questions to get to. A lot of people have been getting in touch about the situation with the Phoenix Park tunnel. Now you touched on that earlier on. This is to do with the signal upgrade for the city. So at the moment it's used for I think freight trains.
Primarily freight trains. We'd run extra trains for when there's, for example, concerts or GAA matches on, and right now we don't use it day to day for commuter services because Connolly is at capacity, because we can't get any more trains through there. But when that resignaling is done, back into 2016, early 2017, and again this is down to NTA funding, but it looks quite likely, we will be operating some services from the Kildare line, not serving Houston, coming around through the Phoenix Park tunnel, and then serving Drumcondra, Connolly, Tara Street, Pearson, Grand Canal Dock. So the real benefit there is in terms of people coming in on that Kildare southwestern corridor, getting them around to the south of Dublin City, because right now their connections aren't very convenient. We also want to maintain, of course, the service for people coming in to Houston who are along those Lewis and bus connections, and because we built up a good market there as well. So we don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul in this instance. But we will have a good range of services for both customer groups, meaning overall an increase in the number of trains coming in from Kildare.
And this could be happening late this year?
It'll be late 16, early 17.
Okay. From Jim Jetson, possibly not his real name, and we should have hovering trains at this stage if you did it this way. The timetable for the Maynooth commuter line is a joke. So there you go. What's the point in having trains leaving Maynooth which arrive in town at 9:45, 9:56 and 10:14? Why not take 2 of those trains and have them run at peak rush hour time? So essentially it means so you can have a train arriving into the middle of Dublin before 9 a.m.
Sure, and we have trains every 10 minutes on the Maynooth line. Now, if you're from Maynooth, it's probably roughly about every 15. But if you add then the M3 Parkway trains that join the Maynooth line at Clonsilla, it's easily every 10 minutes, which is a more frequent service than the Dart, in fact. In terms of those trains as they arrive back in, think of the outward leg that they're doing. They're bringing students from along the line out to Maynooth College. So, rather than running a train back in empty and not getting any revenue, we will put that in service, which is why you have that little cluster of services around that time. Some people do start work at 10 o'clock, particularly in the retail sector, so there is a demand there as well for it, but the primary purpose of those trains is actually in the opposite direction just before.
Right, and will the whole Phoenix Park tunnel situation help that?
No, it's separate. It's on the Kildare side rather than the Maynooth line.
Beg your pardon. Question from the Journal.ie's political correspondent Hugh O'Connell, who's also sitting over there. Hugh spends a lot of his time travelling up and down to Ardeshina and party conferences, and his problems, as many readers did too, with the Wi-Fi. Tends to drop out a line. Drop out a lot when you're outside of urban areas. Is anything being done to
we in terms of, we've got our own kit in terms of upgrading that on board, and that is being rolled out at the moment. Also, we have to work with mobile phone providers, because our Wi-Fi basically is an aggregation of the various signals, and it will choose the best signal at any particular point. And it's not just here. I was reading about it in Britain just a few weeks ago as well, that a lot of the mobile phone providers actually haven't worked deliberately, if you like, to cover the rail networks. So we are liaising with them, pointing out there is coverage area here, there's demand for the services, and we're also looking at then, are there other things that we can do, such as, for example, store content on the trains, which would be a service for customers, and then free up more of the the bandwidth for people who are just on casually.
Okay, great stuff. And some questions that have been coming into us as we've been chatting here. And just let you know, it's a journal live stream, so we've had Barry Kenny here. He's only with us for a few more minutes, but Sean O'Neill of the National Roads Authority will be coming up afterwards. If you have any questions, news@thejournal.ie, or find us on Twitter and fire them to us there. So just a few final questions for Barry. Barry, I'm not sure what you can do with this really. Does Irish Rail understand what the word punctual means? They keep using it, but I don't think they know what it means.
We do know what it means. One thing I'll say is that, and people will see the posters in the stations about punctuality sticks, they're based on the NTA contract. So the NTA say, right, here are the minimum performance standards that we require from you. So when you see those posters in the stations, punctuality is the timekeeping. Those stats are within 10 minutes for intercity services, etc., and within 5 minutes for Dart. Reliability is if the train ran at all or not. That's the one that tends to be 99%, 100%. So that is basically that the train ran. Punctuality is, let's say, those measures that the NTA set.
Okay, this is from Sean O'Kelly via email. Can you foresee more staff being recruited to work in actual stations? I'm asking this because I'm a person with a physical disability, and the service for people like myself is getting worse.
What we could see actually more so is more people to work on the trains, because if you take it that you're at a station maybe for 5 or 10 minutes, maybe a little longer at some of the intercity stations, but you're actually on the train generally for much longer. So that's where the majority of the customer service requirement is. But also it means that if you need assistance in boarding or alighting from the train would have somebody on board. So that's our focus, is in terms of developing and where we're resourcing will be more so on the trains rather than the stations. If we're going to grow in any area, that's where it would be.
Okay, and finally from Dermot O'Gara via email, how come some train drivers and station staff are pretty good at explaining why delays are taking place, others just don't bother their backsides? We have had a bit of feedback, some people saying that if the train goes dead, sometimes there is a voice there, people finding out what goes on pretty quickly. Other times they're left there stranded, so to speak, which is probably the worst aspect of being in that kind of situation, not really knowing what's happening.
Yeah, well, people are generally quite understanding of a delay situation if it's explained to them, and I think the vast majority of our staff are very good at that. It is something that we want it to be. Everybody is very good at it, and customer service standards are always been developed. We're always working with the various teams around the network. So the other part of it is then to support the staff, make sure those PA systems are always working and working well as well.
Yeah, we've had kind of mixed views on your use of Twitter. A lot of people are quite appreciative of it. Some others are saying that they generally don't hear something from you until there's kind of a clamour. Say a train has been stuck at a station for 20 minutes and people are tweeting at Irish Rail. They eventually hear back. I suppose, what's your attitude been towards social media? How have you found it helps you communicating? And is that you on the end of Twitter when we see the tweets?
It's part of the people involved certainly work for me, whatever. I do a little bit of it myself as well from time to time. It's very good. It's very good in terms of getting that concise information out to customers. You take it, you're a customer and you're on a train and it stops between two stations and you're there about 3 minutes, whatever. We'll start getting it then. That wouldn't necessarily be a time when we would start putting, because Twitter's a broadcast medium, and it's something you're sending out to people to say, well, look, there's an issue here which may require you to change your travel plans. That type of thing. I think overall, obviously, it's a means. Take this morning, we'll see a lot of people very annoyed on the Maynooth line, and obviously it's an opportunity to let us know about that. Also, it helped us in able to be report through our control. Can we ensure that announcements are being made on all of the trains? So even if you're not getting a direct response, and at a time of high volume like this morning, every individual message isn't going to get a direct response. We put out the broadcast messages for everybody, but it is being monitored during constantly 7:30 in the morning to 6:30 in the evening, and that is something that's fed back in, be it to train maintenance, be it to our central traffic control who look at the whole network and passing messages on to driver and staff. So it's really, really good two-way information for us, and I think generally it has been well received, and it's an add-on. It's not the only means of communication. Obviously, it is important that it is part of a suite that involves staff at station, staff and trains as well.
Yeah, and what would your advice for passengers, I suppose, be? Because you probably get a lot of slightly vague tweets saying, I'm on a train stuck in Kildare. You might get them in and go,
a couple of things, whatever, whatever. What time is this train going to get to Dublin? Well, what train is it? Is an important bit of information. If there are issues on a particular train, look out for the carriage ID on the train. It's a 5-digit number, generally 4 or 5-digit number. Generally the carriage ends, and that helps us to report information to maintenance very, very quickly. Obviously, hopefully, people have occasion to tweet us as well to tell us if their journey is good and the positives around it.
Okay, there's some advice for you. Great. Barry Kenny, thanks for joining us this afternoon. We'll let you go. So that's it from Barry Kenny. We've Sean O'Neill of the National Roads Authority coming up in just a couple of minutes. The screen's going to go blank for a while, but we're just doing some changing around. See you in a bit. And we're back at the Journal.ie live stream. We had Barry Kenny of Irish Rail in just a few minutes ago. Sean O'Neill of the National, I was going to say the National Rifle Association, you get that all the time. The National Roads Authority has joined us for the afternoon to answer questions about the National Roads Network. So Sean, thanks very much for coming along this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
If you want to drop us some questions, news at thejournal.ie is the best place to send them. Sean's going to be here for around 20 minutes, half an hour. You can also find us on Twitter at thejournal_.ie. So as I said, Sean O'Neill of the National Roads Authority here with us this afternoon. Sean, let's talk about some general things first of all. We keep hearing last couple of weeks, there's reports that crop up every now and again that the M50 is back to Celtic Tiger levels. Can you explain that for us?
Sure. The traffic levels on the M50 have increased 10% year on year for the last few years. So we're seeing obviously two elements combined here. One is that the design capacity of the M50 was increased with the upgrade, so therefore more people are using it. But also the economy is improving. So more people are going to work, more people are transporting goods and services to and from the M50, so it's getting an increase in traffic volumes. And this was all kind of predicted, if you will, by a demand management study that was required to be completed post the M50 upgrade. So just to rewind a little bit, the Onboard Pleanála gave the NRA and the surrounding authorities permission to do the M50 upgrade, to build it. But there was a caveat. Once you build the M50 upgrade, please do a study telling us how you're going to manage it into the future and have it completed within 3 years of said completion of the M50 upgrade. So we released it approximately a year and a half ago now, and it basically tells us what's happening. Demand has increased, demand capacity has increased, and we need to manage that. So this study is actually called a demand management study, apropos. And basically, how are you going to manage the M50 into the future? Because the metropolitan region of Dublin, the traffic flow in and out of the hub of Dublin and in and out of the port, which is Dublin Port Tunnel as well, that's the main economic driver for our entire country. So we have to make sure the M50, it doesn't turn into our Achilles heel, because if it doesn't work well, it'll affect the economy in the region of billions of euros.
Is it fit for purpose at the moment?
It is. It's doing fine at the moment, but again, it's within the demand management study. It talks about, the terminology they use is levels of service. So how are you getting from A to B during certain times of the day? And your level of service diminishes, for example, on a Friday evening, when everyone's evacuating Dublin and heading home or heading to the countryside. Levels of service between certain junctions is diminishing. And people see it every evening, people see it every night when they're driving home. They know that it takes a bit longer if you go between, let's say 5 o'clock and half 6. The traffic levels are going to be a lot higher, and it's going to take you longer to get through the traffic congestion points, etc. So those levels of service are starting to happen more and more at different junctions. So it really is a matter of how we're going to manage it into the future. But right now, it's okay. But certain junctions, it's not as great as it's not as good as we'd like it to be.
And there's a couple of things that have been proposed by yourselves and by some other people that could maybe address this. One of them being lower rush hour speed limits on the M50. Is that something that we can see happening?
Well, as part of the demand management study, now I would ask a lot of your readers to go to, just look up M50 demand management study.
Yeah.
It was done, it's there for all of us to consume and read and understand. But basically, there's different methods that you can use to manage demand, and one of them is variable speed limits. Again, during certain times of the day, you could have, i.e. rush hour periods, you could ask everyone to slow down to a certain rate of speed between junctions, for example. And if everybody behaves accordingly, which you will if somebody in front of you is going 80 kilometers per hour, you'll slow down to 80 kilometers per hour. And we all move consistently. What that'll do is that'll stop the accordion effect. And what the accordion effect is in any metropolitan highway system is as people fly down and someone passes somebody out and all of a sudden they slam on their brakes because there's somebody in front of them slowing down, that actual person slamming on their brakes will affect traffic half a kilometer back. And everybody starts to slow down. And then you have, again, a decrease in the level of service, and the service on the motorway itself goes down. So if you can get everyone to go at the same speed around the same time during the day, you get everyone through the system, because it really is a circulatory system. That's all it is. And you can't make the M50 a double-decker. We can't make it any wider. So we need to figure out how we're going to manage the demand on it.
Okay, another possible way of doing that, multiple point tolling. That's something that came up. Maybe it was in this report as well.
That's correct.
It's a little bit politically contentious. We've had ministers maybe distancing themselves from it.
Yes.
Explain how it would work first of all before we talk about any of the politics.
Well, again, this demand management study talks about how you're going to manage the infrastructure into the future. And part of that, there's different options. There's the variable speed limits, as we've spoken about earlier. There's also tolling, multiple point tolling. And what you're trying to do is change people's behavior, because certain people may not have to take the journey between 4 and 6 in the evening. They may do it beforehand, but if it costs you a bit more, between 4 and 6, for example, you may defer that potential journey time and say, you know what, I'll go at 2 o'clock this afternoon instead of half 4. So you're trying to change people's behavior. Now, again, that is not going to happen. We've been given clear direction from the minister, and we don't implement tolling. It's a policy position from government. We implement tolling, but we don't do policy. So the government said no multi-point tolling, and we understand that.
Okay. To move on to some reader questions. One from Donald Daly. This one has a visual aid. What's the story behind this concrete column on the M50 near Blanchardstown? I'm just going to hold this up to the camera. Sorry, we don't have better graphics. This is the concrete column near Blanchardstown. Is that on the shot, Nikki? Okay. So it's essentially a freestanding column, apparently erected during the M50 upgrade a few years back, and it's just sticking up from the central medium in the middle of the motorway. If you passed it every day, that would probably... You'd wonder
what that is. It's not a remnant of the visitors from Easter Island. It isn't. It isn't. It actually was. It's kind of a combination of design approval for the road expansion, and then also the process of building a walkway over the motorway. What happened is that the designers and the contractor were trying to put in place the support structure for a future walkway overpass, and during the planning approval process, it wasn't approved in that location. It was actually approved further down the road.
Okay.
So in fairness to the designer and the contractor, they went ahead with an assumption that unfortunately didn't come to fruition. So it stands there as a sort of a remnants to the timing of design, approval, and then construction. So there's a bit of enthusiasm.
It makes more sense to leave it there than to take it.
Yeah, well, what it does, it kind of future-proofs the potential for a future structure that could be there as well.
Okay.
Because the cost of putting it up, there's no point in taking it down when it may have a future value, and it's structurally sound.
And you do see, this probably isn't just a one-off, you see structures along the M50 and you think maybe they're supposed to be signs, so that there are similar things to these around the motorway network, are there?
Yes, well, what happens on the M50 itself, again, we're looking at, part and parcel of it is when you're trying to see the future and figure out how you can put in heavy infrastructure without having to go back and add that additional cost and that additional element when you know something's going to happen in the future, like new signs. We have variable message systems, VMSs, and they're sort of the high, you can see them now on the M50, and there's sort of the multiple messaging that comes on a sign and lets you know what goes on. But they have big foundations, and they have structurally big elements to them. So some people will notice them around the network, but that's for future. Again, future-proofing, really.
Okay. From another reader, from Colin Casey, what exactly is the status of the proposed N17 upgrade from Tune to Claremorris? Is the route defined beyond the status of emerging preferred route?
No, it actually isn't. What happened is it's actually frozen. What happened during the economic crisis and the collapse is there was an assessment done as to where multiple projects were in their status around the country, and we were directed to basically cease and desist on a lot of them. You have to think it in the sense that during peak construction, the NRA was, kind of the Celtic tiger when we were building the motorway network and really out there and doing a lot of work. Our major infrastructure development has dropped by 80%. And our budgets, even our maintenance budgets, have dropped by over 50%. So there really had to be a huge scaling back on potential future projects and what was going to happen, and this unfortunately has been frozen.
Right. Okay. So frozen until
there's more funding available.
Right.
And the good news is the economy is coming back. We're starting to see some positive lights, and borrowings, PPP elements are happening, as we know, public-private partnerships for your readers. So borrowing money is cheaper now, and we'll see what happens. But right now, any projects that we have on the ground are predominantly PPP, public-private partnerships.
Okay, and now on that subject, we've had quite a few questions about this from Dennis O'Sullivan, for instance. When's the Cork to Limerick motorway going to be built? Two major cities connected by glorified Bowreen. And also Shane Honan, I have nightmares about Buttevant, Charleville, Benogue.
Yes.
What's the story there?
I absolutely wouldn't disagree with your readers. It's a significant connector that needs to be upgraded. But again, funding. I mean, the country, I think people need to appreciate that there's a certain amount of resources and the country has to distribute them appropriately, and then that's for politicians to decide. And as of right now, there's no funding for it. And there was clarity made a couple of months ago now, but maybe about 2 months ago now, that as of right now, the M20 is not being funded.
Okay. Is it in the same category as the M17 upgrade? Are they all down there in the wait for the economy to get better?
Yeah, I think as of right now, what we're being told from the department is that it's as is. It remains frozen. So I know it's creating a lot of frustration for people, and we do realize it's an important piece of infrastructure. And for your readers, really, Ireland had kind of two macro road plans. One was to connect Dublin to all the other major urban hubs, and the second phase was to interconnect those. So we have Dublin to Belfast, Dublin to Galway, Dublin to Limerick, Dublin to Cork, Dublin to Waterford, and then you want to connect everyone along that. You want to connect Cork to Limerick, you want to connect Limerick to Galway, Galway up to, as far as Sligo, and that was all part of the Atlantic corridor. But all of that has been frozen and piecemeal. It is happening. I should correct myself. The M17, M18 is happening. That was further ahead of the planning process, and it's a smaller scheme to the Cork to Limerick motorway. So the good news is the M17, M18 is under construction. That is happening. So we are getting things back on track. So hopefully the M20 will come back on track. But as of right now, it's frozen.
Okay. Now I want to go to more day-to-day matters. This might be more a Road Safety Authority area, but from Barry Morkin, it's sad that some people have to be taught to drive correctly. However, I was wondering, are there any plans to educate people on how to use the overtaking lane on a motorway? Indicate, overtake, get back into left lane. People call it the fast lane.
Sure,
but it's not the fast lane.
No, it's the overtaking lane. I know my friends and colleagues at the Road Safety Authority, this is something they definitely do a fair bit of work on. And a lot of it is knowledge-based. People need to accept and changing their behavior is very important when you can't stay in the overtaking lane. You have to go back into the travel lane. And do I do it? Honestly, at times I do. I maybe later in the evening or nighttime, and there's no one on the road. If I'm, and I may stay in the overtaking lane. So maybe we're all guilty of it. I know I am, and I need to correct my own behavior sometimes and realize. And I slowly but surely, I'm starting to get into the habit of it, and it makes driving a little bit more fun.
Yeah, and when you get to a congested road, at rush hour, they kind of all blend into one, though.
They do, at that point, yeah. Basically, when there's free flow, when traffic's free flow, you should be, obviously if there's someone in the travel lane that's going a bit slower and they're not at the full speed limit, which let's say is 120, it is actually, so, but on the M50 it's 100 kilometers, but basically you should be allowed to pass them off safely, go back into the travel lane. And when there's full congestion, if the traffic is busy in either lane, it doesn't make a difference.
Okay. A couple of quick ones. Why doesn't the NRA take Visa debit cards for tolling?
It's not the NRA. The individual toll operations are like individual shop owners, and they are well within their rights to decide how they want to seek compensation for the use of their road, because it's under their private operation. And that's the relationship between them and the state. So it's.
I imagine it's a speed thing, though. If you're coming to
exactly. A lot of it has to do with the fact that they want people to just get through their system, and with credit cards it takes more time, and then there's verifications and all that sort of thing. But no, the individual operators, some of them do take them. Some of them do. You can go to go to NRA.ie, and you can go through our tolling. Just click on tolling, and we have a whole litany of information there for you on who accepts and who doesn't.
Okay. Why is there no Junction 8 on the M50? I never noticed this, but is there no Junction 8?
Yeah, there's no Junction 8. This is a really good question. It was funny. I was speaking to Brendan Kennedy, a colleague of mine, because he's a bit of an NRA historian and he oversees a lot of our mapping and planning things. So Brendan was telling me that it was part and parcel of a plan back in the day that Junction 8 was going to actually exist. It was going to be a road bringing you out towards Naas.
Okay.
And this goes back to the 80s. And basically it never happened because the zoning around the area changed and you could never go back to building it. So again, it was future-proofing, much like our monolith that's out on the motorway. That Junction 8 would have been there, but no, that's not going to happen now. So.
And it's kind of like the Spinal Tap question. Why not just make number 9 number 8 and like make that one louder?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and primarily because they wanted to put a little different volume level in between both of them, I think, and that's basically what happened. It was obviously there was plans to put it in place, but it never happened.
And there's no point in changing the signs now.
No, because now the cost and everything and putting them up and now
everybody knows where they are. Yeah.
Yes, and it's a secret. Nobody knows Junction 8 is gone. So
that's great.
now it's out.
A slightly more serious question from Averil McLaughlin. Are there any plans to increase the height on the central medium on the M50? Anytime there's an accident on either side, the other one comes to a standstill due to rubberneckers causing huge delays. And I used to think rubberneckers was such a problem in Ireland, but then you realise it is. You get the back of a tailback and you realise, what is it? Accident over there.
Just people looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an international phenomenon, and it's about human behavior. It really is. And I was reading some things on it a few months ago. In Tokyo, for example, or in different major metropolitan highway systems, the emergency crews actually have special cordoned areas that they literally erect and put them up. It's not really, and then what happens is people want to then see around that. You know what I mean? So no matter what you do, people's inquisitive nature is to figure out what's going on, and we all slow down. So I don't really know. I think driver education is going to be a big one on this one. Maybe making people realize it's kind of ghoulish.
Yeah.
It's a bit unsociable. Let the emergency services do their job, and you're doing yourself no favors, the people behind you no favors, or the people, in the incident that is happening any favors by trying to eyeball it and see what's going on. There's nothing positive coming out of it.
Yeah. Back onto road construction. This is from Sam in the comment section. When will the road from Wexford to Dublin be complete? The layouts are causing quite a bit of trouble around Arklow, the Jack White's area, which anyone will know if they drive up and down regularly.
Yeah, Arklow Rathnew is part and parcel of Newlands Cross. It's a single contract, PPP, public-private partnership, Arklow Rathnew and Newlands Cross flyover. I know a lot of people are benefiting from Newlands Cross already, and BAM, the contractor, is doing quite a good job on the Arklow Rathnew section, and that will be open by August.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, so I think readers will be happy to hear that.
Okay. Now, we've had a few quick questions about Newlands Cross. It opened last November,
yes.
I believe.
Yes.
Before we get to the problems with it, maybe you can just tell us a bit about it, first of all.
Sure. Well, Newlands Cross was one of the last major congestion points on the urban motor network. Where really the infamous Red Cow, we've improved that. We separated the Lewis from the road traffic. We took away traffic lights, so we made the Red Cow itself total free flow. But then you got up to Newlands Cross, Fonthill and Bellegarde interchange, and you were basically stopped there. With the flyover being built, you're going up and over Bellegarde and Fonthill, and you're continuing on your journey either out towards Naas or back in towards Dublin and onto the M50. So it really has been a huge success. People's reactions to it have been very positive, actually much more than I even anticipated, and it's made a big difference, especially in people's daily commutes. But it's still there's still work that needs to be done. The contractor's telling us, I checked with my colleague Kieran Kelly this morning, and the contractor's telling us that they'll be substantially complete by the end of March. So the intersection of Fonthill and Bellegarde at the main line, underneath the flyover that we're all benefiting from, there's still some work being done there. Okay,
because one of the points being made by a reader, sorry, let me just name check this person, David Connolly. Since the flyover opened on the N7, southbound traffic in the morning time has become unbearable on the M50. Too many cars are trying to merge. And it's already heavy there at the moment. I suppose that's coming from the main, the local access basically onto. Right. Yeah, they're just trying to get in with the main flow of traffic. Yeah, again, that's a congestion point on an urban link. Yeah, and it's the way it is. It's the volume of traffic. But in terms of the actual flyover itself and that junction, there is still, it's not just done and dusted. There is more. Correct. Yes, there is more work to be done. Yeah. You're going to have a greater distance to merge, so that should help with the flow a bit. But it's still a merging point. We can't take away from that. But the main point is that once people get that merging point, they're on it, there's a disbursement of traffic at the Red Cow now that's much better than it was before, so hopefully that'll improve for them. Okay, another quick one. This is about junctions 22 and 23 on the M7 for Roscrea and Moneygall. Yes. Why are they so badly designed? That's Joe Carey wants to know. Are there any plans to improve the layout of these potential death traps, he says? Well, Joe, that's obviously very
accusatory language, and I think that it's misplaced. The design elements within interchanges have to do with the volumes of traffic that they hold. So what that means is you don't design a four-leaf clover interchange for a small amount of cars. So these are a tighter radius interchange. It's different to some of the bigger interchanges you see on the network, so absolutely it is different, but it's well within the design criteria. Again, it has to do with volumes of traffic. There's nothing, people need to slow down. If they, a lot of people are hitting interchanges at a high rate of speed, whether they be the big four-leaf, sort of interchanges, or they be the single turnoffs, as if this one is.
Even the Red Cow, it's up to 30 kilometers an hour, and it can be quite tight.
Yeah, it can be very tight.
Okay. Some questions coming in from readers as we speak. By the way, Sean O'Neill with the National Roads Authority here for a couple more minutes. These are, I'm just reading these for the first time. Too many roads in Ireland have potholes, faded markings, and no cat's eyes on dark roads. Will these ever be addressed? Now, you're obviously national roads.
Yes, that's what I think. Sure. I think people, a question like that, and I know people are frustrated hearing this answer over and over and over again, but funding is limited, and local authorities dealing with local roads and regional roads, and then the National Roads Authority ourselves, our maintenance budget has been cut by over 50%. And again, priorities have to be given elsewhere, and we understand that. But the road user is seeing it. It has having an effect at the local level. And unfortunately, some of these are the end result of that. These are practical implications of budget cuts.
Okay. Another question. Again, I'm not sure this is exactly your area, but we'll throw it at you anyway.
Sure.
Are they going to have consistency in how road speed limits are set? How can a Boreen in West Kerry have a 100-kilometre limit while most of the N11 in Dublin is 60 kilometres per hour? And Drummartin, I think, Link Road has a 50 kilometres per hour limit. Is it setting limits in urban zones to maximise fine revenues? And that's from our comments section. So there was a review of this being flagged by Leo Bragg a while back.
That's right. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
But it actually comes from speed limits are not part of the NRA's. We're a consultee in that process, but we basically we deal directly. It's the responsibility of the Department of Transport and the local authorities and the Gardaí, and then ourselves as consultees from a design standpoint. And there is to be, talk about uniformity and what can actually happen. It really is an all-encompassing job, because Ireland has in total approximately 100,000, 97,000 kilometers of roads. That's from a Boreen all the way to a major motorway. And the NRA, just to give you perspective, the NRA oversees the national road network, which encompasses motorways, and that's approximately 5,400 kilometers of that. So it's a small piece, but at the same time it carries over approximately 45% of the traffic, of daily traffic. So the national road network is very important, but it's a smaller piece of the whole. And we obviously have design standards, speed limit criteria, certain elements that we oversee, and people know that when you're on a motorway you're at 120, or if you're on the M50 you're 100, because the interchanges are so close together and the road is so wide. Now, that's real modern engineering, that's what's going on there. And then in the historical network, whether they be national secondary routes or local and regional roads, you have a variety of engineering problems. And it is within the remit of the local authorities, along with the Department of Transport, to come up with a solution to that. And it's all well and good for us to be giving out about speed limits, but the question is, do you slow down? You need to make your own decision when you're driving on a Boreen. It may say 80 kilometers, but for God's sake,
it's not a target.
Yeah, it's not a target, exactly. So I think people need to take a little bit of ownership, and myself included, and slow down. But importantly, they're right. There needs to be some sort of standard that says, look, all these secondary or local regional roads, they need to be down at this level of speed. And that is happening. We haven't gotten the final word on it, but there is some study group that was put together with experts, and there's supposed to be something on it.
Okay, great stuff. We'll look out for that.
Thanks.
Sean, we'll leave it there in a second. Just before I let you go, you were just mentioning earlier that when sometimes you appear in radio stations, we haven't had any comments or questions like this from the readers. Are great.
Yes.
But people always say, who put this yank in charge of the roads?
Yes.
I suppose you're not in charge.
No,
of the roads.
God, no, far from it.
You're talking about it.
Yes.
But obviously Sean O'Neill is a clue there.
Yes. I'm originally from County Clare, and my father was working in this. We immigrated, and when I was about 10 years of age, my dad worked for the airlines, so we were able to come back and forth every summer. So Ireland to me was Shannon Airport, Ennis, and then kind of the west of Ireland. Dublin was the big smoke even back then, even though I was growing up in Boston. I was a real city kid, and then in the suburb of Braintree. But you have a tendency to pick up this accent when you're in a country for coming up in 25 years, but I'm thrilled to be back home, and this is just the way
Was
I
there any
sound.
connections with roads there? I mean, obviously there was the Big Dig, was the
yes.
big project happening in Boston,
Yes.
probably when you were younger.
Yes, I was actually the head of communications there.
Okay.
That's the connection.
Right.
Yeah. So
everything
I
happened,
worked.
they bring it over
Well,
here.
I was working from approximately 1997 to 2005 at the Big Dig, and there was a litany of challenges every day on an urban project of that scale. It was amazing, but it was great working with great men and women, and I learned a lot.
Okay, I'm going to ask Farah one more question
Sure.
before I let you go. This is being typed as we speak by Susan. Motorway lights. Why are there so many motorway lights not working? These haven't just been on the blink a week or two. I drive the M1 every day for 2 years, central Dublin to Balbriggan, and dozens of motorway lights are physically there but not switched on.
Yes.
Are you trying to save a few quid?
Spot on.
3 question marks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're trying to save a few quid. That's exactly correct. There's an energy efficiency question, and there's also a costing question. And there's been a reduction. I think it's again, I'm guessing on this, but there's some European directive, and there's also just the costing elements of the environmental impact of necessary versus unnecessary lighting on road networks throughout Europe, and also in particular here in Ireland. And that's exactly what's going on. It's a cost-saving mechanism.
That's a surprising answer. I'm glad we asked.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Great. Okay,
Right.
Sean, we'll leave it there. Thanks for coming.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks very much. The live blog will be continuing for a bit, and we look forward to your comments on the piece later on. Thanks a lot.